Worth inside a pack was supposed to be measured by loyalty, labor, and the promises one wolf kept when winter came lean. Cordelia Silvermane had once believed that, because belief was the only inheritance no one could seize from her hands. Then she learned that worth could be weighed like ore, traded like salt, written into a treaty line and sealed with wax while elders toasted peace over spiced wine. Hope and betrayal had always lived in the same room, she thought. But this was the first night she watched betrayal stand, smile, and call itself necessary. They bound her wrists in iron before dawn, though she had not fought them. The cuffs were old, pitted with rust at the hinge, and narrow enough that each jolt of the wagon carved heat into the skin above her pulse. By noon, that heat had become a steady throb reaching up her forearms and into her shoulders. She sat between two pack guards she had known since childhood, men who had once let her feed their hounds and now kept their knees braced against hers so she could not rise. No one looked at her directly. Not her aunt with the ink-stained fingers, not the baker who used to set aside crust ends for her, not even her older brother Thomas, who marched alongside the wagon with his jaw locked and his eyes fixed on the road. When the moon gate came into view, carved obsidian arch catching a pale, rain-heavy sky, the procession slowed. Pack banners dipped. Musicians struck 3 hollow notes. Ceremony, Cordelia thought with a bitterness that shocked even her. They would sell her, and still they would demand pageantry. The treaty feast waited beyond the gate in the receiving territory, inside Blackwood Fortress where walls rose from the mountain like dark teeth. Fires burned in iron braziers along the causeway, perfuming the air with cedar smoke and fat from roasting boar. Wolves from 3 border packs crowded long tables in the outer court. Laughter rolled between stone pillars, goblets lifted, deals were being made, peace was being congratulated. At the center dais stood Dante Blackwood in layered ash-gray robes, hands spread in priestly welcome. He was younger than the stories made him, not yet silver at the temples, with a voice smooth enough to make command sound like kindness. Reformer, purifier, guardian of lawful order. The titles had traveled farther than caravans. Cordelia watched him bless the bread and felt, without evidence and without reason, a chill gather at the base of her neck. An elder from her own pack rose to speak. Elder Marius had carried her when she broke her ankle at 10. Tonight he did not use her name. In honor of ceasefire and shared law, he announced, Silvermane Territory offers living tribute. A bloodline asset with no claim to succession, no mate bond, and no independent standing. Use as your council sees fit. A few wolves clapped, most did not. Cordelia stared at the packed earth below the dais and counted breaths, because rage would do nothing and tears would feed them. 1, 2, 3. Inhale through pain, exhale through shame. She felt stripped even before they touched her again. Dante descended 2 steps, studying her as if she were a text he intended to annotate. Cordelia Silvermane, he said, and hearing her name in his mouth felt like a theft. Your line carries volatile inheritance. For the safety of all packs, every tribute wolf will undergo purification before moonrise. You, first. Murmurs shifted into a low, unsettled hum. 2 temple guards approached with ritual blades etched in black runes. The metal did not gleam. It absorbed light. Cordelia tasted copper and realized she had bitten the inside of her cheek. My lord, Tomas said suddenly from the edge of the court, voice cracking once before he forced it steady. She has served without incident. Is this required tonight? Required. Not please. Not spare her. Required. Even now he negotiated procedure, not her life. Dante did not turn. Fear does not nullify law, warrior. A woman from Cordelia's pack, Lisette, let out a short laugh meant for nearby ears. Dangerous girls should thank the altar for fixing what birth ruined. Cordelia looked up then, because some wounds demanded witnesses. I carried your son through fever while you slept, she said quietly. You called me sister. Lisette's expression did not change. Sisters do not start wars. The first temple guard seized Cordelia's arm and hauled her toward a circular stone basin carved into the court floor. Salt, ash, and wolfsbane smoldered in the grooves. She recognized a nulling pattern, old and forbidden in several territories, designed to suppress scent signatures and fracture bond potential. Purification, they called it. Erasure, her body answered. When her knees hit stone, runes burned awake beneath her palms. Light climbed her skin in jagged threads, silver white and furious, not the dull red the priests expected. Gasps cut through the courtyard. One guard swore and jerked back. The other pressed a blade against the side of her neck, hand trembling now. Dante's calm sharpened. Hold her. Do not let her complete a shift. I cannot shift, Cordelia hissed. You all know I cannot. That had been her oldest humiliation. Silvermane blood, no wolf form. Useful enough to fear, defective enough to discard. Now the runes snaked up her throat anyway, hot as brand iron, and the world narrowed to smoke and the knife's pressure and the sick understanding that they might kill her in public and call it theological necessity. Then a lash cracked. Pain did not land on her. A body moved between her and the priest blade, broad shoulders in common soldier leathers, dark hair rain-damp at the nape, scar carving from temple to jaw like a pale crescent. The whip bit across his back instead, fabric splitting, and he did not even grunt. He only caught the guard's wrist, turned it outward with efficient precision, and guided the blade away from Cordelia's throat. Ritual protocol, he said, voice low, controlled, addressed to no one and everyone. No blade at the carotid during ignition, unless your aim is execution, not cleansing. It was the kind of correction only a veteran would dare and only a fool would make in front of Dante Blackwood. Yet his tone carried neither fear nor insolence, merely fact. Dante's gaze settled on him. Name. Cyrus, the soldier said. Windrider rank, escort detail. A lie? A partial truth? Cordelia could not tell. She only knew that when he shifted half a step to shield her from the basin flare, the animal part of every wolf in the court noticed and recalculated. Dante smiled without warmth. Discipline your posture, soldier. Tribute belongs to temple jurisdiction. Cyrus inclined his head. As commanded. But he did not move far. Not far enough for a clean strike. Not far enough for Cordelia to miss what he had done. He had taken pain meant for her in front of witnesses who would punish him for it later. Fatalism cracked along a hidden seam, not shattered, just cracked. She was not safe. She was not free. Yet for the first time since the cuffs closed, she was not entirely alone. They dragged her from the basin at dusk and locked her in a holding chamber beneath the east transept, a narrow room where damp stone sweated and the air tasted of old incense. Her wrists had swollen around the iron. Burned rune residue mapped her shoulders like frostbite made of light. Through a slit window she could see a strip of sky bruising toward storm. Outside in the corridor, temple novices argued in hurried whispers. The red moon rises in 2 nights. Then we start with the Silvermane. First sacrifice proves intent. Dante wants the brand tonight. Cordelia pressed her ear to the door, pulse hammering hard enough to blur thought. First sacrifice. The words landed with clinical certainty. No trial, no transfer, no chance to petition council law. They had not traded for labor. They had traded for spectacle. Run now. The command came from somewhere deeper than panic, deeper than strategy, a raw line of survival she had nearly forgotten existed. She flexed against the cuffs, felt skin split along the edge, ignored the sting. The room held little. A wooden stool, a water bucket, chain anchor at the wall. She tipped the stool, snapped one leg against stone, and worked the jagged end into the cuff hinge. Slow pressure. Breathe. Twist. The iron groaned, then gave just enough for one wrist to slip free when she wrenched hard enough to tear skin. Footsteps approached. She slid the loosened cuff back in place, dropped to her knees, and lowered her head as the door opened. A novice entered with a clay bowl of ash paste and a branding iron wrapped in cloth. Young, maybe 19, with temple marks still fresh at his throat. He recoiled when he saw her face, as if expecting a monster and finding merely a woman who was very tired. "I was told you'd be unconscious," he muttered. "Untie me, and I will be," she said. He gave a brittle laugh. "Not my decision." He set down the bowl and reached for her wrist. Cordelia moved. The stool leg struck his forearm, not hard enough to break, hard enough to shock. He cursed, stumbled, and she shoved past him into the corridor, chain clattering from one cuff like a bell announcing revolt. Shouts erupted behind her. She ran anyway. The temple underways were a maze of vaulted passages and service stairs slick with condensation. Torches smoked in wall brackets, throwing wavering amber against painted saints whose eyes seemed to follow her. Her bare feet slapped cold stone. Every breath scraped. Left at the split where wind smelled of rain. Up where the draft strengthened. Behind her, boots multiplied. "Stop her. Seal the north stair. She is consecrated property." Property. She nearly laughed, wild and breathless. They could catalog her later. She burst through an unlatched side door and into open night. Rain hit like thrown gravel. Wind tore her hair loose and shoved at her spine. Ahead stretched the fortress wall walk, crenellations black against a sky pulsing with distant lightning. Below, the outer yard boiled with movement as warriors changed watch, and stable hands wrestled tarps over supply carts. If she could reach the gatehouse, maybe she could vanish in the market quarter beyond the lower terraces. Maybe she could find sympathetic rogues. Maybe she could die outside a ritual circle, on her own feet. The trade-offs were non-trivial, but choosing among bad options still felt like agency. A horn blared once, temple alarm. Figures turned toward her from the yard below. Some pointed, some drew blades. Others hesitated, reading her irons, her burned skin, the chain dragging sparks where it struck stone. Cordelia took the nearest stair 2 at a time and nearly collided with a patrol cresting from the barracks level. 6 soldiers in wet leathers, wolf-hide cloaks darkened by rain, hands dropping to weapons on instinct. At their center stood the scarred escort from the feast. Cyrus Windrider halted so abruptly the soldier behind him almost ran into his back. For one suspended second, thunder swallowed all other sound. Rain streamed from his hair across the old scar at his cheek. His gaze moved over her face, the broken cuff, the temple ash streaked down her arm, and settled with a focus so precise it felt like touch. Temple guards spilled onto the wall behind her, shouting for seizure rights. Barracks warriors shifted formation around Cyrus, uncertain which chain of command held in this exact moment. Cordelia stood between them, shaking from cold and fury, one stolen breath from collapse. "By temple decree," a guard yelled, "that woman is to be returned for cleansing." Cyrus did not look away from Cordelia. "Is that true?" Her throat worked. The rain tasted of iron and smoke. "They mean to brand me null and burn me before red moon." Something ancient and disciplined tightened in his face, not surprise, not doubt. Recognition without explanation. He stepped forward, placing himself in the narrow space between her and the shouting guards, and drew his dagger just far enough for steel to catch lightning. Not at her, at them. "Then tonight," he said, voice quiet and lethal under the storm, "no one takes her unless they go through me." No one moved at first. The rain came harder, drumming on stone, running in silver threads from spear tips and hair and lashes, while command fractured across the wall into competing loyalties. The temple guard captain bared his teeth. You are escort rank. Stand down. Cyrus held his dagger low, point toward the ground, posture uncoiled but final. She is on barrack stone, not temple sanctum. Jurisdiction is contested. Contested by whom? By me? The soldiers behind him exchanged looks that carried years of drilled obedience and one fresh measure of fear. Cordelia felt both camps watching her as if she were a torch dropped between dry fields. One wrong breath, and all of it would burn. A horn sounded again from the inner court. Dante had heard. Cyrus shifted half a step without looking at her, enough that his shoulder blocked the nearest guard's line. "Stay behind me," he said under the rain. She almost laughed at the absurdity. Stay behind me, as if she were not chained, branded, hunted. As if one man could halt a decree blessed from a dais. Yet she moved when he moved. Survival sometimes wore the shape of trust before trust itself existed. The temple captain raised a hand. "Seize both." Barrack steel came free in a rough, uncertain chorus. The first temple guard lunged, boot skidding on wet stone. Cyrus met him with a wrist trap, turned the blade outward, and kicked behind the knee. The guard dropped hard, weapon clattering into the gutter. A second came in high. Cyrus ducked, slammed an elbow into the man's sternum, and sent him backward into two others. Clean motions, no wasted force. "Enough!" barked one of the barracks sergeants, but he did not say to whom. Lightning forked above the western tower, close enough that everyone flinched. The flash showed Dante at the far stair landing, robe hem dark with rain, two priest blades at his side. His voice carried despite the storm. "Soldier Windrider, deliver the tribute to me." Cyrus turned his head slightly, never giving Dante his back. "My lord, she was harmed during unauthorized nulling escalation. Purification is authorized by treaty. Execution is not." That landed like a slap. Dante's expression did not change, but the temperature of the moment did. Cordelia saw it in the way hands tightened on hilts, in the way wolves scented weakness and found none. Dante extended one pale hand, palm up. "Cordelia, come and end this disorder. I will be merciful." Merciful. The word scraped. Cyrus spoke without raising his voice. "Choose." The choice was theatrical and brutally real. Return to the altar, or stand with the man defying a spiritual ruler in open storm. Cordelia stared at Dante's open hand, remembered the ritual basin igniting under her palms, remembered Tomas saying required instead of spare her. She stepped behind Cyrus. Dante's gaze cooled to stone. "Very well. Storm watch post. Complete the rite there, with witnesses. If her blood is as volatile as claimed, let the wall itself testify." Temple novices hurried forward carrying a bronze bowl and a chain of black runes. Cordelia's pulse stumbled. "Not again. Not here." Cyrus looked over his shoulder. "Can you stand?" "Yes." It was not true for long. They brought her to the watch alcove under the crenellations, wind shearing through the arches. A novice cut the remaining cuff from her left wrist. Iron snapped, skin tore. She swayed and caught the wall with her right hand. Stone sliced her palm open along an old training scar. Cyrus reached to steady her. Her bleeding hand slid over his bare wrist where his bracer had shifted. The world narrowed to touch. Heat surged beneath her breastbone so fast she gasped. Not pain, not entirely. A fierce current raced from palm to shoulder to spine, then outward, as if every nerve had remembered a language it had been denied since birth. Rain vanished. Shouts vanished. She heard two heartbeats, one in her chest and one impossibly close, falling into a shared cadence that made her knees weaken. Cyrus inhaled sharply, the sound cut off halfway. His head snapped toward her. Amber bled into his irises, bright and liquid and ancient, predator and oath, bound in the same gaze. His jaw locked. A low sound left him, not quite a growl, not quite breath, feral at the edges and controlled by force. Cordelia could not look away. I know this. I do not know how I know it, but I know it. This is the story old women whispered when lights died, the one I pretended was nonsense because nonsense hurt less than wanting. Mates are for other wolves, for whole wolves, for women not traded like grain. I am burned and chained and shaking on a fortress wall. I am nobody's chosen. Yet his scent floods the rain, cedar and steel and storm, and my body answers as if a locked door has opened from the inside. Run, because this can be used against you. Stay, because leaving feels like tearing out your own ribs. If this is another trap, it is the cruelest one. If it is true, it is the first true thing I have had in years. Cyrus dropped to one knee on wet stone. He did not touch her throat, did not pull her close. He took her injured hand between both of his, bowed his head, and pressed his forehead to her knuckles in a warrior's vow so old she had only heard it in ceremonial recitations. Moon witness, he said, voice rough, no claim without consent, no bond without honor. Shock rippled through the gathered soldiers. A temple novice made a warding sign. Dante's face went bloodless under the rain. Cordelia's cut palm throbbed between Cyrus's hands, warmth pulsing through the wound in steady waves. She should have yanked free. She should have denied what every instinct in her recognized. Instead, her fingers curled, just once, around his wrist. Dante recovered first. Break contact, now. Cyrus rose slowly. When he turned back to the wall, that molten amber remained in his eyes for a breath too long before receding. Proceed with your right, he said, with full protocol, eyewitness. The novice with the bronze bowl approached Cordelia, hands trembling. He smeared ash paste over the runes on her shoulders and spoke the null prayer. The symbols along the stone flared black, then lurched silver-white as soon as they touched her scent. Wind slammed through the alcove. The bowl cracked down the middle with a metallic shriek. The novice screamed and dropped it. Black ash sprayed, then burned away in midair like snow over flame. Cordelia's vision blurred, the fortress wall tilted. Cyrus caught her before her skull hit stone. She heard Dante shouting orders as if from the bottom of a well. Containment chamber, sedate her, seal the sigils. Then darkness folded over everything. She woke to cedar. Not incense, not wolfsbane, not temple smoke. Warm cedar oil and clean linen and rain cooled by shuttered windows. Her cheek rested against coarse wool. For a disoriented instant she thought she had died and woken in some kinder territory. Then her back screamed. Cordelia jerked upright with a broken sound. A hand came into view, open, empty. Easy, Cyrus said from the stool beside the cot. You are in an old infirmary under barracks lock. No temple access for now. A single lamp burned low, painting gold over rough stone walls and shelves of bandages, tinctures, and chipped ceramic bowls. Her shirt had been cut down the back and retied loosely at her shoulders. Burned rune residue, dark and metallic, crusted from neck to waist. Shame and panic rose together. Who touched me? I did. He held her gaze. Only me, for the burns. I asked 2 healers for cedar and cloth, then dismissed them. She dragged the blanket tighter around herself, breath hitching. Why? Because you were shaking even unconscious when others came close. The answer was simple, almost blunt, and therefore harder to doubt. Cyrus dipped a clean cloth into warmed oil and paused. May I? No one had asked her that in years. Not at the gate, not at the feast, not on the altar stone. She nodded once. He worked with disciplined care, wiping residue from the edges inward, never touching raw skin without warning. This will sting. A beat later. I need to lift the tie at your shoulder. Another beat. Tell me to stop, and I stop. Cordelia waited for the catch, the demand hidden under gentleness. It did not come. When she flinched at a crack of thunder, he did not hush her, did not crowd her. He set the cloth down, reached to his belt, unbuckled his dagger, and placed it on the floor 3 strides away, where she could see it clearly, and could reach it first if she lunged. Then he returned to the stool and sat with both hands visible on his knees. "I grew up around wolves who used kindness as bait," she said, voice hoarse. His mouth tightened around an old bitterness. "I grew up around wolves who used fear as law. Neither taught me much worth keeping." The silence that followed was not empty. Rain tapped the shutters. Somewhere above, boots crossed a corridor in measured patrol rhythm. Cordelia watched his profile in lamplight, the scar at his jaw, the muscle ticking once in his cheek, as if restraint cost him constant effort. "On the wall," she said at last. "What did you feel?" Cyrus did not answer quickly. When he did, each word sounded chosen. Recognition. Relief so sharp it hurt. Terror. Because your enemies became mine in front of witnesses. Mine? He met her eyes. Yes. Her throat burned unexpectedly. She looked away and immediately hated that reflex. If Dante can sever bonds, he will try. He will fail. You cannot promise that. I can promise I do not leave you to him. She believed that before she meant to. The realization unsettled her more than the bond itself. He stood, lifted his cloak from a peg, and set it around her shoulders when a tremor ran through her. The wool held his heat, cedar and rain and iron. He did not fasten it at her throat. He stepped back and resumed his seat where she could keep him in view. Outside, voices rose in the corridor. A knock sounded, sharp and official. "Tribunal," called a sergeant. "Common hall, now." Cyrus exhaled once through his nose, then rose. "Can you walk?" "With help." He offered his forearm, not her wrist. She took it. The barracks tribunal chamber had been a grain store once, long and low, with rafters blackened by old smoke and wolf standards hanging from iron hooks. 40 warriors crowded benches along both sides, wet cloaks steaming near braziers. At the far end sat 3 senior captains behind a scarred oak table, Temple Guard representatives flanking them with sanctimonious stillness. Cordelia stood beside Cyrus in the center aisle, cloak wrapped close, burned back throbbing beneath cedar oil. Eyes tracked her like thrown knives. Captain Varick, thick-necked and silver-bearded, struck the table with his palm. "Matter before the hall. Tribute female Cordelia Silvermane, property transferred by treaty, currently withheld from temple jurisdiction by escort soldier Cyrus Windrider. Explain." "Property. Even here." One captain snorted. "Explain why we risk interpack war over a branded stray." Temple Representative Elian lifted his chin. "Dante Blackwood requests immediate surrender. The cleansing must proceed before Red Moon." Murmurs of agreement, dissent, fatigue, pack politics as meat grinder. Cordelia straightened despite the pain. Cyrus stepped forward in plain leathers still torn from the wall fight. Under old barracks law, any wolf under sworn protection answers only to blood challenge until jurisdiction is lawfully adjudicated. Varick's brows climbed. Old law is ceremonial. Old law is still law unless repealed by unanimous council and moon witness. It has not been repealed. A younger captain laughed outright. "By what authority do you invoke protection oath, Windrider? You barely outrank the stablemaster." "By the authority of my vow. Your vow does not outrank treaty." Cyrus's voice turned colder. "Treaty does not outrank unlawful execution." Elian slammed a scroll onto the table. "This female is corrupted. She destabilized a sanctioned rite and enthralled a soldier through scent manipulation. She belongs in temple restraint." Cordelia felt heat pulse along her spine, anger cutting through fear. "I am standing here," she said. "Speak to me, not around me." The room quieted by a fraction. Elian gave her a pitying smile. "You stand, Because our mercy allows it. A captain on the left rose and came down the aisle, hand already reaching for her elbow. Enough theater. We hand her over, take the priest's blessing, and sleep before dawn. Cyrus moved. 3 motions, almost too fast to follow. His left hand trapped the captain's wrist. His right forearm struck just above the elbow, numbing the grip. Then he pivoted, used the captain's momentum, and put the man on his knees with his own blade at his throat before anyone else cleared scabbards. No flourish, no snarl, just complete control. Blood challenge, Cyrus said to the room, breathing steady. Anyone touching her accepts the same. The captain froze, humiliated and furious. Varric swore under his breath. Half the chamber rose to their feet. Stand down, Varric roared. Cyrus released the hold and stepped back, blade lowered, giving the captain room to rise with dignity partly intact. The choice was intentional. Cordelia saw it and filed it away. Varric looked from Cyrus to Cordelia and back, calculating risk vectors the way commanders did when no outcome remained clean. You defied chain of command on the wall, disrupted tribunal order, and drew steel on a superior. Penalty stands. Cyrus inclined his head once. Accepted. 2 enforcers brought out the punishment post. Cordelia's stomach dropped. No. Cyrus did not look at her as he stripped off his torn overshirt and braced his hands against the wood. Eyes on me, he said quietly, for her alone. The lash cracked across his back. Then again. Sound more terrible than sight. Warriors watched with hard faces, some satisfied, some uneasy, some newly wary of what debt they were witnessing. By the 4th strike, his shoulders shook once and steadied. By the 6th, silence had swallowed even the whispering temple men. Cordelia did not look away. This is what protection costs, she thought, and the thought came in present tense, immediate and bright. I was taught that power always takes, always demands kneeling, always hides cruelty inside ritual words. He bleeds in front of them to draw a boundary around me and calls it law, not ownership. If I accept this, I owe him. If I reject it, I still owe him, because debt is already written in skin and vow and the way he set his weapon where I could reach it first. I do not know whether fate is mercy or another chain, but I know this. No one has stood between me and a blade without price attached. He has paid one anyway. When it ended, Cyrus straightened slowly, jaw hard, breath controlled. An enforcer moved to bind his wrists for confinement, but Varric raised a hand. Enough. Protective claim holds until dawn council. His gaze cut toward Ilian. Tell your priest he petitions by law, not seizure. Ilian's mouth thinned. Dante will not forget this insult. Cyrus turned then, finally, and looked at Cordelia over his shoulder. Not triumph. Not apology. A question, silent and raw. She stepped forward before fear could argue. She took the strip of clean linen from the nearby table and held it out. Sit, she said. A faint, surprised huff from one of the younger warriors broke tension for a blink, almost laughter, then vanished under stern looks. Cyrus obeyed without comment, lowering himself to the bench. Cordelia stood behind him and wrapped the linen carefully across the fresh welts, hands steadier than she felt. When she finished, she rested her palm once between his shoulder blades, over the strongest part of him. I am still afraid, she said, low enough that only he heard. But I am done pretending you are my enemy. His head bowed a fraction, as if receiving a vow. Outside, thunder rolled away toward the eastern ridges, and for the first time since the iron cuffs closed around her wrists, Cordelia let herself imagine morning. Morning remained an idea for less than a minute. The tribunal doors had barely shut when a runner in temple gray slammed into the corridor, breathless, rainwater dripping from his sleeves onto the stone. He thrust a wax-stamped tablet toward Captain Varric, then recoiled when he noticed Cordelia standing beside Cyrus with blood still drying at her wrists. Varric broke the seal, read, and swore with a depth that made nearby soldiers straighten. "Dante calls midnight assembly," he said. "All captains, all priests, all tribute classifications. He invokes emergency moon doctrine." Ilian, still lingering at the end of the hall like a vulture waiting out a storm, smiled thinly. "The reformer acts swiftly. Disorder spreads when weak blood is indulged." Cyrus turned his head, and the corridor torchlight found the hard line of his jaw. "What doctrine?" Ilian's smile widened, pleased to deliver pain. "The Ash Circle Covenant. Prophecy lines are declared coercive by nature. Bonds tied to such blood are spiritual fraud. Null branding is now preventive law." The words landed with a blunt finality Cordelia felt in her teeth. Not just her, then. Any line Dante named dangerous, any bond he called contamination, it was not cleansing. It was a legal scaffold built fast enough to look inevitable. Varric crushed the tablet in his fist. "Preventive law requires council vote." "Council will vote," Ilian replied. "After instruction." He left before anyone answered, temple novices closing around him in a moving wall of gray cloth and smug certainty. Cordelia watched them go and understood that Dante had stopped improvising. He had chosen his hour. Cyrus touched her elbow lightly. "Infirmary. Now." She followed him through 2 turns and down a narrow stair lit by oil cups set in old niches. Her legs trembled less from exhaustion than from calculation. Dante was shifting from ritual theater to governance, from isolated cruelty to structural control. If he convinced enough frightened captains that fated bonds were manipulation, then wolves who wanted safety would hand him power and call it discipline. The resulting tension scraped at every nerve in her body. She had just found one true connection in a life of barter, and the most influential spiritual voice in the territory was preparing to criminalize that very connection before moonrise. The infirmary door opened onto the same cedar-scented room, but this time they were not alone. A broad-shouldered healer with cropped silver hair looked up from grinding herbs and narrowed her eyes at Cyrus's back. "Sit," she ordered, "or I knock you down and stitch you there." Cordelia blinked. The healer snorted. "Name's Brenna. I serve wounded wolves, not titles and not fools. He qualifies as both tonight." For 3 breaths the absurdity of it pried loose a fragile, startled sound from Cordelia that almost became laughter. Cyrus's mouth twitched despite himself, then flattened when Brenna peeled back the linen and hissed through her teeth at the lashes. "Temple whip," Brenna muttered. "Cowards love ceremony when someone else wears the cost." While she worked, a second knock came, coded and quick. Cyrus answered it with a low word. Sergeant Hale slipped inside, shut the door, and placed a wrapped bundle on the table. He was younger than Varric, with watchful eyes and rain-dark curls plastered to his forehead. "Intercepted from Temple courier route," Hale said. "I read enough to know we are in deep trouble." Cyrus unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay 3 thin slate plates etched with vision script, 2 sealed ledgers, and a ring bearing Dante's private mark. Cordelia moved closer, heartbeat climbing. Hale opened one ledger to a page marked in red, line after line of names, pack origin, scent profile, bond status. Next to each, a notation, null brand, then ash release. Her own name topped the first page. Brenna stopped bandaging long enough to whisper, "Moon keep us." Hale tapped the slate plates. "Forged visions. Script says the moon goddess rejects fated mates as bondage and commands priest oversight of all pairings. These are being copied and sent to border packs by dawn." Cordelia stared at the precise curves, the counterfeit sanctity. He wants to erase choice and call it devotion. Cyrus had gone very still, the dangerous stillness she had seen on the wall before he moved. He wants command of army and altar under one doctrine. If he can sever bonds at scale, he can break alliances by scent and rebuild them through fear. Hale looked between them, then at Cordelia's wrist where the broken cuff had left a raw arc. There is more. Midnight Assembly is cover. Temple Guard is already moving tribute wolves from holding cells to the lower sanctum, quietly. No witnesses except Ash Circle acolytes. Cordelia felt cold settle behind her ribs. The scheme had begun before the proclamation left Wax. Dante was not waiting for lawful debate. He was staging facts first, then demanding ratification from shocked captains at Blade Point and Prayer. Cyrus rose from the cot despite Brenna's curse. How many loyal to Barrack's command? Enough to hold one corridor, Hale said. Not enough to hold the fortress if priests ring alarm horns. Then we do not hold the fortress. We hold her and the proof. He gathered the ledgers, handed one to Cordelia. Can you read old script? Yes. Then if I fall, you carry this to any council fire and speak the names. The room seemed to contract around that sentence. Cordelia lifted her chin. You do not get to make heroic speeches and collapse on principle. We need strategy, not martyrdom. For the first time since she had met him, open surprise crossed Cyrus's face, then a brief, fierce approval that tightened something low and warm in her chest. Good, Brenna said dryly, tying off the last bandage. She has sense. Keep that one alive. Outside, bells began to toll from the upper court. Not alarm yet. Summons. Pressure gathered from all sides over the next hour like floodwater against a cracked gate. Barracks runners came and went with reports that contradicted each other every few minutes. Some captains refused Dante's emergency doctrine outright. Others called for compliance until a full moon tribunal. 2 had already sent their wolves to assist Temple escort operations, either from conviction or terror of being marked heretics. Through every corridor moved the same whispered phrase, spreading faster than reason. Bonds are coercion, bloodlines are chains. Cordelia sat on an overturned crate in the supply alcove beside the infirmary, one ledger in her lap, and forced herself to keep reading names even when letters blurred. Wolves from river packs, mountain packs, urban dens, lineages she had only heard in market songs. Most were marked unmated, but not all. The paired ones had notes beside them. Severe nulling recommended. If no severance, terminal ash. A wall she had not known she had built began to crumble under the weight of it. This was larger than her survival, larger than her bloodline grievance, larger even than the bond humming under her skin whenever Cyrus passed within arm's reach. Dante was trying to redefine personhood in the language of faith, to turn living wolves into administrable risk categories. If he succeeded tonight, no outcast, no orphaned heir, no uncommon scent would ever be safe again. Cyrus returned from command briefing with rain in his hair and fury banked behind discipline. Varric delayed formal vote until moon apex, he said. Dante accepted too quickly. He already has what he wants in motion. What move? Cordelia asked. Perimeter closure. No one leaves fortress grounds without temple writ. He crouched in front of her, close enough that the bond thrum steadied her breathing against her will. I can still get you out through old cistern tunnels. Brenna knows the route. She closed the ledger. And the others? His silence answered. I am done being smuggled as if my life matters only in private, she said. If he brands them while I hide, he still wins. Cyrus's gaze sharpened. If he gets you inside that sanctum, he kills you first to sanctify the rest. Then we stop him before the first brand. You are injured. I am angry. His mouth almost curved, pained and proud at once. Those conditions have launched wars. Their heads bent over the same map, shoulders almost touching. Attraction had become a non-trivial variable in every tactical decision, and both of them knew it. Her body registered him first as heat and scent and gravitational pull. Her mind answered with caution, then analysis, Then an unwilling trust that felt earned rather than imposed. She feared dependence because dependence had always been weaponized against her. Yet she could also see the trade-offs with unusual clarity. Refusing connection would not protect her from Dante, and accepting connection did not require surrendering judgment. The crux was choice, and choice kept returning to her in Cyrus's smallest acts. A shout rose in the corridor, then another. Hale appeared in the doorway, chest heaving. Temple proclamation posted at every stair. Midnight rite moved forward. Starts at moonrise, not apex. That is now, Brenna said. Hale nodded. And there is a personal addendum. Cordelia Silvermane is declared vessel of bond contagion. Any wolf sheltering her is excommunicated from pack rights. Cyrus stood so fast the crate skidded. Varric agreed? Varric objected. Dante overruled through emergency spiritual authority. Cordelia rose more slowly, the ledger clutched tight. He means to isolate us socially before he cages us physically. Already happening, Hale said. 2 gate squads stood down when temple acolytes approached. Would not meet my eyes. The bells changed pattern. 3 quick, 2 long. Alarm now. Time, Cyrus said. He led her through a service passage to an abandoned armory tucked behind the western barracks wall. A room of rusted spear racks and cracked shields where sound from the main halls dulled to a distant metallic roar. Brenna barred the door behind them and handed Cordelia a flask. Willow bark for pain, the healer said. Tastes like regret. Drink anyway. Cordelia swallowed and winced. Brenna squeezed her shoulder once, rough affection, then left to fetch fresh bandages and message runners. The door clicked shut. Quiet settled, thin and temporary. Cyrus stood by the single arrow slit, watching rain stripe the courtyard below where torch lines were converging toward the temple stairs. For the first time all night, no soldiers watched him, no captains judged him, no doctrine interrupted the space between them. Cordelia moved beside him. You are hurt. So are you. That is not an answer. He looked at her then, and in the dim light his restraint looked less like armor than a wound carefully bound. If I tell you what I am, I make you a greater target. You already did that when you knelt on the wall. A long beat passed. His hand lifted, hovered near her face, and stopped. May I? She nodded. His fingers brushed rain-dried ash from her cheek with reverent care, then withdrew before touch could become claim. I have hidden in plain leather for 3 years, he said quietly. Long enough to learn which captains sell fear and which still hear law. Dante rose while counsels argued procedure. I needed proof before I moved. Proof of what? That he is not merely zealous. He is building a throne from liturgy and fire. And you? A muscle jumped in his throat. I was born to a throne I did not trust myself to hold. The admission rang between them, sparse and charged. Cordelia felt understanding click into place around old inconsistencies. The command in his silence, the way warriors obeyed him before questioning themselves, the calculated risks that belonged to someone trained for more than escort duty. She drew in a shaky breath. You kept your name from me. I kept everyone's name safe by staying unseen. His voice roughened. Then you touched my wrist and every careful wall I had built cracked. The honesty hit harder than any vow. Cordelia leaned back against the cold stone and let herself speak from the unguarded place she usually buried. I spent years being told I was dangerous and defective in the same breath, she said. Too valuable to ignore, too flawed to keep. I learned to survive by needing nothing from anyone. Now I stand in a fortress where the one person who sees me clearly may also be the one person they can use to break me. I do not know how to carry that without running. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth through the cloak, and dropped to one knee again, mirroring the wall watch vow. Then do not carry it alone, he said. No cage, no bargain, only what you choose, moment by moment. Her thoughts surged, present tense and relentless. I am afraid because fear has kept me alive. I am drawn to him because my bones recognize what my mind distrusts. I can smell rain, cedar, iron, and underneath all of it, a promise that has never been forced. I can still walk away. I can still say no. The fact that I can is why I stay. If this is ruin, I step toward it with open eyes. If this is grace, I will not refuse it out of habit. She sank to her knees across from him. Their foreheads touched once, brief and steady. No spectacle, no witness, just shared breath in a room full of dead weapons. Moment by moment, she whispered. The door exploded inward. A concussive crack of black fire against iron tore the quiet apart, hurling splinters and sparks across the floor. Ash Circle acolytes in lacquered gray masks poured through smoke, null chains whistling as they swung. Behind them surged Temple Guard with hooked poles designed to pin wolves at the shoulders. Brenna shouted from the corridor, then coughed hard as dark vapor rolled in low along the stones. Null smoke, Cyrus barked, cloth over mouth. He ripped a strip from his bandage and tied it over Cordelia's nose, then shoved the ledger into her hands. Do not drop this. The first acolyte lunged. Cyrus met him with a forearm block and drove him into the wall hard enough to shatter the mask. Two more came from the left. He kicked a rusted shield stand into their knees and caught a chain mid-swing, wrapping it around his fist before yanking the attacker off balance. Cordelia ducked a hooked pole, grabbed a broken spear haft from the floor, and struck at wrists and knuckles, buying inches of space. Through the smoke, she saw Hale in the corridor, fighting to hold the choke point with 6 barracks wolves against triple their number. Temple horns screamed from the courtyard. Above the din, Dante's voice rolled through amplified chant from the main stairs, serene and merciless. Bring the Silvermane alive. Begin cleansing of all tribute stock. Stock. The word turned her stomach. An acolyte slammed into her side, driving her to one knee. The ledger skidded. She lunged, fingertips brushing leather, when a null chain snapped around her forearm and tightened with rune heat. Pain shot to her shoulder. Cyrus roared, cut down one guard, reached for her, and another blast of black fire struck the floor between them, erupting in a wall of sparks. Portcullis bars dropped from the ceiling at the corridor mouth with a thunderous crash, splitting the room in two. Cyrus hit the iron hard enough to rattle bolts, teeth bared, eyes gone feral amber in the smoke. On the other side, Cordelia was dragged backward by 2 masked acolytes, while a third hooked the chain around her waist. Cyrus! I am coming, he shouted, voice raw. Hold on to me! Hold! She braced both feet and drove the broken spear haft into the nearest acolyte's ribs, twisting free for a heartbeat, but null smoke thickened and her lungs seized. The ledger was torn from her grasp and kicked down the corridor toward Temple hands. Brenna appeared through haze, hurled a glass vial that burst in bright blue flame, and bought Cordelia one more breath. Not enough. A heavy blow struck the back of her knee. Stone slammed up to meet her. Chains cinched wrists and ankles in one practiced sequence. Through narrowing vision, she saw Cyrus on the far side of the bars, fighting 3 guards at once with a fury that made even masked zealots hesitate. Dante stepped into view beyond them all, robes untouched by ash, staff capped in black crystal pulsing like a second heart. He looked down at Cordelia as if inspecting a purchase. Take her to the central sigil, he said. If the king's stray hound follows, seal the circle and light the brands. Temple guards hauled her upright and dragged her toward the sanctum stairs, while bells hammered the fortress into panic. Behind her, iron shrieked as Cyrus tried to wrench the portcullis from its tracks, and the sound of failing bolts told her the night had tipped from threat into open war. The sound of failing bolts followed her down the sanctum stairs like thunder trapped underground. Temple guards hauled Cordelia through a corridor lined with ash-black candles that burned without smoke. The null chains bit deeper each time she stumbled, rune links tightening in response to struggle, and the air grew hotter as they descended, thick with resin and old iron, and a sweetness that turned her stomach. Chants rolled up from below, hundreds of voices hitting the same syllables until language became pressure. The lower sanctum opened all at once. It was not a chapel. It was a theater carved for obedience. Tiered stone benches rose in a full circle around a central ritual floor inlaid with concentric sigils. At least 60 wolves knelt in chained rows near the outer ring, tribute from half a dozen territories, heads forced down by masked acolytes. On the inner ring stood captains, elders, and temple delegates under banners painted with Dante's ash emblem. Above them, through the open oculus, the red moon hung low and swollen, staining every face with bruise-colored light. Cordelia was dragged to the center altar and forced to her knees. Dante stepped down from a raised platform, staff tapping stone in measured beats. "Witnesses of Pack and Temple," he called, voice amplified by the chamber's design. "Tonight we cut coercion from our blood. Tonight we return wolves to free will." Acolytes answered with a roar. Some captains did too. Others stayed silent, rigid with the kind of fear that wore duty's mask. Dante turned to Cordelia with priestly calm. "Your line has been used for dynastic leverage for generations. You may yet serve peace by ending with dignity." She lifted her chin despite the chain at her throat. "Dignity does not wear your collar." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, gone in a blink. "Apply the first brand." 2 acolytes brought an iron rod from the brazier. Black runes crawled along its length like live things. Cordelia smelled searing metal and braced for impact. Then a crash shook dust from the vaulted ceiling. The upper gate exploded inward. Barracks wolves poured through in wedge formation, shields up, Hale at the front with Brenna behind him flinging blue fire vials that burst against null smoke and tore temporary gaps in the haze. Cyrus came through last and fastest, leaping from the broken stair rail to the inner ring in one brutal drop that scattered 3 acolytes. His bandages were soaked through, his eyes feral bright, and his sword was already moving. Chaos detonated. Temple Guard surged to intercept. Captains shouted contradictory orders. Chains rattled as kneeling wolves tried to rise. Dante slammed his staff down, and black fire climbed the outer sigil, forming a wall between center altar and the incoming fighters. Cordelia's heartbeat pounded so hard it blurred the edges of everything. Cyrus hit the black fire barrier, recoiled with a hiss as it scorched leather and changed angle, carving a path through guards toward her anyway. Hale took a spear haft to the shoulder and kept moving. Brenna cursed every god she had ever named, while she broke a novice's wrist with a medicine satchel full of glass. A captain in river colors shouted, "Hold lines for temple authority." Varric answered from the opposite tier, voice like a war drum. "Hold lines for lawful counsel." No one touched the chained. Dante raised both hands. "You see? Disorder follows contaminated blood. Seal the center." Acolytes activated iron pylons around the altar. Additional chains shot from floor slots and wrapped Cordelia's arms and torso, locking her upright at the center of the sigil. The brand iron descended. "I am going to die on his stage," she thought, and the thought arrived with perfect clarity. "I can wait for rescue and become his symbol, or I can move and become my own witness. Fear has governed every room I have survived. Not this one. Not now." She jerked her right wrist against the nearest chain until skin split over old scars. Pain flared white. Blood ran down her palm and dripped onto the central rune. The sigil stuttered. Dante snapped his attention toward the floor, sudden alarm cracking his composure. "Stop her hand." Cordelia drove her bleeding palm flat onto the carved line and dragged it clockwise, smearing blood through the null pattern. Silver-white sparks erupted where her blood crossed black script. The central ring shuddered, then inverted. lines rethreading themselves into a new geometry she knew only from forbidden nursery fragments. Silvermane Truthmark, the oath circle that punished lies spoken inside its boundary. Acolytes recoiled as the floor flashed. "Cordelia!" Cyrus shouted, halfway through a knot of guards. "I can cut you free." She met his eyes through smoke and red light. "Hold the perimeter." He froze for a fraction, hearing command where he expected plea. "Hold it," she said again, louder, voice carrying on sanctum stone. "No one leaves this circle until judgment is done." The resulting pause was non-trivial, a hinge between systems. Wolves who had dismissed her as tribute now heard authority in her tone and looked to Cyrus for contradiction. He straightened to his full height, turned toward the battling lines and roared, "Barracks, lock the exits, by Crown command." Silence struck the chamber for one stunned beat. Crown command. Cyrus ripped the plain leather torque from his throat and threw it aside. Beneath it, a blackwood sigil set in gold flashed at his collarbone, ancient mark of the ruling line. Gasps rippled outward like shockwaves. Varric dropped to one knee first. Hale followed, then half the barracks rank, then uncertain captains in staggered waves. Dante's lips peeled back. So the hidden king crawls out at last. Cyrus did not look at him. His gaze stayed on Cordelia. Perimeter held, Luna of my choosing. Finish it. Heat pulsed beneath Cordelia's skin, not from the fire this time, but from a fierce anchoring certainty. She ripped the sacrificial chain from the altar post with both hands, links screeching across stone, and whipped it around Dante's staff shaft. The impact jolted his grip. He tried to wrench free. She planted her feet and spoke in a voice that felt older than her own. "By Silvermane vow forbidden and remembered, by scent true and heartbeat true, let no tongue prosper in this ring by false decree. Judge by what is, not what is preached." The truth mark ignited in a full circle, silver light lancing outward to the benches. Every wolf inside the boundary gasped as the mark touched them, a brief sting at the sternum like cold iron pressed to skin. Dante smiled, but strain tightened it. "Superstition? You think blood theatrics can overrule doctrine?" "Speak then," Cordelia said. "Tell them the ledgers are fake. Tell them no paired wolves were marked for terminal ash." Hale kicked the recovered ledger into the ring. It skidded to Dante's feet, open to the page of names. Dante lifted his chin. "Necessary measures preserve civilization." The truth mark flared. Burning script blazed across his chest under the robe, visible through cloth. "Liar." Murmurs became shouts. A captain from the mountain pack stepped forward, face ashen. "My daughter's name is in that ledger." Ilian tried to back away from the ring edge. "Forgery. This is all royal manipulation." Brenna lobbed a second ledger at his boots. "Read your own hand, coward." He stammered. "The moon goddess rejects forced bonds." Again the mark burned. "Liar." Wolves nearest him snarled and pulled away. One of his own temple guards dropped his spear and stared at Ilian with naked revulsion. Dante saw control slipping and struck without warning. He slammed the staff tip into the floor, channeling black fire through the chain wrapped around it. The flames surged toward Cordelia in a jagged lance aimed at her heart. Cyrus moved with a speed that blurred. He vaulted the inner ring, hit Dante from the side, and locked his shoulder under Dante's arm in a crushing hold that forced the strike offline. Blackfire clipped Cordelia's left side, scorching cloak and skin, but not center mass. She staggered, teeth clenched against the pain, and kept her grip on the chain. Dante thrashed, wolf-side surfacing in his face, pupils narrowing to slits. "Release me, pretender." Cyrus tightened the lock. "You forged prophecy and sold slaughter as salvation." Dante spat at Cordelia, voice thick with hate. "You were bought to be ash." Cordelia snapped the chain taut and yanked the staff downward into range. "I was sold as tribute, not born for your altar." Cyrus drove Dante to one knee and said, each word ringing to the highest bench. By pack law and moon witness, Dante Blackwood is stripped, exiled, and left unbonded. Never, Dante snarled. He tore one hand free, claws extending, and lunged for Cordelia's throat. She did not retreat. She broke the chain link against the altar edge, turning the jagged length into a crude spear, and drove it through the black crystal core at the top of his staff. The crystal shattered with a sound like Winter Lake ice splitting end to end. Shockwave. Black fire reversed. Runes the truth mark had branded across Dante's chest ignited in violent sequence, unraveling glamour, title, and sanctified mask in seconds. He screamed and tried to cross the still-burning sigil boundary to escape the backlash. The instant his foot hit the lit line, reflected fire climbed him from boots to shoulders, consuming the corrupted power he had built into the stage itself. He fell where the altar shadow ended and did not rise. For 3 breaths, no one moved. Then the chamber exhaled in ragged, disbelieving waves. Chains were dropped. Kneeling wolves were cut free. Captains shouted for medics. Someone began to sob openly. Someone else started a howl that shook loose dust from the high vault, and this time it was not for cult or crown. It was for surviving. Cordelia's knees gave. Cyrus caught her before she struck stone, hands careful around burns and bruises. Up close, the fury had drained from his face, leaving shock and tenderness and raw relief. "It is done," he said, voice unsteady. She leaned her forehead to his shoulder and let herself breathe him in through smoke and blood and rain. "Then get me out of this room." He carried her. They moved through service corridors toward the old Moonwell chamber beneath the fortress root, escorted by Hale and Brenna until the final iron door. There, Cyrus dismissed everyone with a look that brooked no argument. Brenna hesitated only long enough to press salve into Cordelia's hand and say, "Call if pain spikes, or if either of you faints from stubbornness." Hale, pale and limping, gave Cordelia a warrior's bow before he closed the door from the outside. The Moonwell chamber was circular and quiet, fed by a thin waterfall that slipped down black stone into a clear basin. Red moonlight filtered through a grate above and softened to silver over the water. The air smelled of wet rock and cedar, and the faint metallic tang of ritual aftermath. Cyrus set Cordelia on a low stone bench and knelt in front of her, palms open on his thighs. He was shaking now that motion had stopped. Not from fear, but from the body's delayed accounting of everything it had endured. Blood from a cut at his temple ran to his jaw and dropped to the floor between them. She touched his face with careful fingers. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into the contact with a quiet, almost startled hunger. "Cordelia," he said, opening his eyes again, forcing steadiness into every word, "I will not take what is not freely given. Do you want this bond sealed tonight?" She understood the question for what it was. Not ritual pressure, not destiny as coercion, but a door held open for her choice. "Yes," she said. Her voice wavered and then settled. "I want it because I choose you, not because we bled in the same war." A breath left him like a prayer. He reached to the laces at his collar and pulled them loose, baring the strong line of his throat. Then he bowed his head, offering that vulnerable place first. "Then mark me," he whispered. "Let every part of this begin with trust." Tears stung her eyes so suddenly she laughed once through them at the wild tenderness of him. She slid from the bench to kneel opposite, one hand bracing his shoulder. The pulse at his throat beat hard beneath her thumb. "I do not know the right words," she admitted. "Use true ones." She bent and pressed her mouth to his skin first, a soft anchor, then bit at the junction of neck and shoulder where bond scent ran strongest. His entire body went rigid, a strangled sound breaking from him as pain spiked and transformed into something deeper, warmer, threaded with relief so profound it shook both of them. Gold-lit runes raced under his skin from mark to chest, then down his arms in branching lines. Mine, he said against her hair, hoarse and reverent, not possessive so much as astonished. Yours, she answered, lifting her head. Mate. The word settled into the room like a bell tone. Cyrus cupped her face in both hands. May I mark you? Yes. He moved with deliberate slowness, giving her time to stop him at every breath. She turned her head, exposing the curve where neck met shoulder, and felt his breath warm on damp skin. When his teeth pierced, sharp pain flared bright and immediate, then broke into a flood of molten gold warmth that poured down her spine and outward through ribs and wrists and the arches of her feet. Her back arched on reflex, a cry catching in her throat, and his arms locked around her to hold, not restrain. The mate mark bloomed under her skin in silver and amber spirals that mirrored his runes. The bond snapped fully into place with a sensation like two heartbeats, finding the same drum and refusing to part. Images and emotions flowed with startling clarity. His first sight of her in iron cuffs at dawn, the restrained fury he had swallowed, her loneliness in the wagon, small and silent and stubbornly unbroken, his terror when the portcullis dropped, her decision at the altar to stand in the sigil and choose action over rescue. None of it drowned her. All of it joined. She clutched his shoulders as the wave crested and eased, breath shaking. Cyrus. I am here. No cage, she murmured, pressing her forehead to his. No bargain. Only choice, he answered. She kissed the corner of his mouth, then his brow, then rested against him while the bond settled from wildfire to steady ember. They stayed that way for long minutes, holding each other under silver waterlight, hands mapping reassurance across unbroken ground newly made between them. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer and stronger at once. Then I choose you, Alpha King, in storm and in peace. He drew her closer, arms circling her with careful certainty. And I choose you, Cordelia Silvermane, before crown, before pack, before breath. By dawn, the fortress' great court was full. Word of Dante's fall and the Truthmark trial had traveled faster than riders. Captains from every attached territory stood under their banners, flanked by freed tribute wolves, now wrapped in barracks blankets instead of chains. The red moon had dipped. A clean gray dawn spread over wet stone. At the center dais, Cyrus wore formal blackwood armor for the first time since she had met him. He still stood half a step behind Cordelia until she moved, then matched her stride to the platform. That, more than the crown set on his brow, silenced the crowd. Varric read the charges and sentence into open air so no one could claim secrecy. Hale, shoulder-bound and jaw-bruised, presented the ledgers for public archive. Brenna testified to the branding injuries and null smoke deployment in language so precise no lawyer could twist it. Elian, stripped of temple sash, tried once to deny involvement until Cordelia asked him one question inside the still faint truth mark etched into the courtyard stones. Did you know paired wolves were listed for ash release? He whispered yes. Gasps rolled through the assembly. Varric pronounced him exiled with Dante's surviving inner circle, unbonded and barred from right leadership in all signatory pacts. No one objected. Then Cordelia stepped forward to the front edge of the dais, facing the moongate beyond which her birth territory waited. She did not let her gaze slide past familiar faces when the Silvermane delegation entered. Elder Marius looked 20 years older than he had at the feast. Thomas stood at his shoulder, eyes red-rimmed, hands empty and visible. Lisette came too, stiff-backed, clutching her own elbows as if cold had found her in summer. Cyrus spoke first, voice carrying to the last rank. The tribute treaty is void. No wolf will be traded as living collateral under my crown. He turned to Cordelia and held out the treaty tablets. She took them, broke each wax seal, and fed the parchments one by one to a brazier before all witnesses. Ash lifted into morning light. "New law," she said. "By joint council and moon witness, bloodline trafficking and ritual coercion are banned across allied pacts. Any wolf displaced by doctrine violence may claim protected passage through this fortress corridor." Hale planted a new standard at the base of the dais, not ash gray, but silver and black intertwined. Tomas stepped out from the Silvermane line then, voice rough. "Cordelia." The single word trembled on old history. She met his eyes and waited. He swallowed. "I chose procedure over you. There is no excuse." His shoulders squared, as if bracing for deserved rejection. "If there is any work to repair what I helped build, assign it." She let the silence hold long enough for everyone to hear the weight of his request. "You will oversee the first caravan on the protected route," she said. "Food, healers, and guards for displaced wolves. You answer to Sergeant Hale." Tomas bowed, relief and grief crossing his face at once. "Yes, Luna." Lisette could not meet Cordelia's gaze. Elder Marius did, tears standing openly now. He dropped to one knee in the old way and said, "We failed you." Cordelia exhaled, feeling the bond at her side steady as bedrock. "Then do better with those still vulnerable." As the sun broke fully over the wall, council wolves came forward in turn to press thumbprints into wet clay beneath the new oath text. Varric signed. Brenna signed with hands still stained blue from alchemical fire. Hale signed and winced and grinned when Cordelia nudged him to sit before he toppled over. By moonrise that night, the border fortress courtyard had been transformed. Torches ringed the stones. Freed wolves, barracks fighters, and arriving delegations from both territories gathered in a wide circle, not ranked by status but mixed by household. The old sacrificial route map had been painted over with a new corridor line running both directions. At its center stood Cordelia in simple dark silver, mate mark visible at her neck like living moonlight. Cyrus wore no cloak, crown set aside on the altar table, making his vow as wolf first and king second. Varric, serving as witness elder, asked the formal question. "Cordelia Silvermane, do you accept place as equal Luna beside Cyrus Windrider, by choice and uncoerced will?" "I do," she said, clear enough to reach the outer ring. "Cyrus Windrider, do you accept bond and governance in shared authority, with no right above her person or voice?" "I do." "Gladly." He knelt then, not as spectacle but as promise, and pressed his palm over hers where it rested against her lower belly. She had felt the new flutter there once already in the moonwell, a tiny pulse beneath the settled bond that Brenna had confirmed with a startled laugh and wet eyes. Safe. Strong. Wanted. Cyrus looked up at her, wonder stripping the last of his old defenses. "I swear fealty to my mate," he said, voice rough with joy, and to the air quickening beneath her heart. "My strength is your shelter. My crown is our work." Cordelia threaded her fingers through his and drew him to his feet. Around them the circle erupted in howls that rose clean into the night, not for conquest, not for fear, but for a future chosen in the open. She had crossed the moon gate in irons. She stood beneath it now crowned, marked, and unafraid, with her mate at her side and a new life steady under her hand.